Don't believe a con so much that it becomes a truth. Don't get conned yourself, and remember that actions have consequences. In Nightmare Alley, written and directed by Guillermo del Toro, and also writing credits go to Kim Morgan. And del Toro's directed some of my favorite movies, specifically these two, Pan's Labyrinth and Pacific Rim. Here's what happens when you give del Toro a big fucking budget. And Pan's Labyrinth is one of the most stylish movies that he's done in quite some time. He also directed Kronos, Mimic, Blade 2, and Hellboy 1 and 2, aka the only Hellboy movies that goddamn matter. And this had a fucking stacked goddamn cast. When I first saw the trailer, I was like, holy shit, I gotta see this. I mean, when del Toro's directing something, it at least piques my interest. And whether it's, obscure del Toro and like, maybe stylish but kind of del Toro like Crimson Peak, which was quite good at some points but wasn't one of his best, or whether it's just straight up horror del Toro, you're going to get a little bit of everything in this. And the cast, Bradley Cooper, Cate Blanchett, Toni Collette, Willem Dafoe, Richard Jenkins, Rooney Mara, fucking goddamn goddess, good fucking grief, she's gorgeous, and Ron Perlman, because any del Toro movie has to have Ron Perlman in it. I think it's written into the bylaws of humanity now. Whenever you have a del Toro movie, you have to have Ron Perlman there. The big hulking individual that is Ron Perlman. And this is set during around the beginning of World War II, and it's a period piece that is all about that carny bullshit and all about, working the marks and everything and the traveling circus and who's really the con, who's really, somebody that wants to make a living, and are there really good people in the world, and who's really the total, goddamn bastard villain in this movie. Well, you find out that there are shades of gray here, and I'll get into spoilers here in a little bit, but I will, since I'm far enough into the review, I will say this is one of my favorite movies of the year. I was really fucking excited to see this, and I was like, alright, this is a pretty damn stacked cast, and I gotta fucking see this. I decided to travel to a theater that I really, really liked. It's about 30 miles from my house. I had an early enough showing. I watched it with one of my best friends, and I was captivated by pretty much every goddamn minute. I will say, before I really describe the plot, this is a very, 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 very slow burn movie. It's also kind of done film noir style, so it's not straight up horror, but there are psychological drama elements to it as well, and it's just well acted and well fucking tremendous cinematography. Del Toro understands how to have style and substance with his movies, and he just melds it perfectly here. This is one of the best Del Toro movies in a number of years. This is everything Crimson Peak should have been, and that movie was disjointed. Now, I still really like Crimson Peak, and it looked great, but it felt hollow at times. It wasn't one of his best efforts. This was goddamn good. I mean, the performances are great. Bradley Cooper was, perfect as a guy. You kind of figure out, what until you get into spoilers, like maybe you're not totally sure, but it's pretty obvious what his motivations are. Rooney Mara, great in this. She's been great in a lot of things. Toni Collette, even though she has more of a supporting role here, I've loved her for a number of years. I loved her pretty much since The Hours. She was great in that, and great in Hereditary, and great in a lot of other stuff. I mean, she was even great in Stowaway, and Stowaway wasn't all that good. Ron Perlman has a nice, little supporting role here. Willem Dafoe does. And basically, Bradley Cooper's character, Stanton, comes upon a traveling circus that he, it's like something happens in the beginning where it's like there's this house fire and he leaves and he suddenly comes upon this traveling circus, and it's a freak show element thing. And since it's set in like, the late 1930s, there's the car stylings, like they have like even horse-drawn carriages. That's how far back, in the weeds, so to speak, these guys are. And there's various people. There's a a little person. I don't know if you really can call them midgets anymore. Vertically challenged, I guess, would be the best way. And everybody has their role that they play. Willem Dafoe heads this whole thing, and he does really good as far as bringing Stanton into the fold. And there are people that don't trust him. There are people that do trust him, because obviously when you bring an outsider in, you have to wonder, are they, going to be part of the carny life? Are they trying to grift us? Can you grift a grifter? Can you con a con? What can you do? And it becomes very obvious what the characters' motivations are as things go on. Now, obviously, it does give you a peek behind the scenes about how, like, certain people do things, how certain people do strongman stuff. Hence where Ron Perlman comes in. And there's like sightseeing stuff, like, psychic and everything, telling secret, figuring out from people, the whole John Edwards thing. Remember that, when, he needed to acknowledge something, acknowledge he was a goddamn hack. But like Toni Collette pretends to be like, she's the seer, she's Xena the seer, and she's like doing this and everything. She has a guy with her, Pete, that has this ability to see stuff, and Stanton sees this and wants to know the secrets, and then decides, hey, I'm gonna try to utilize this as well. Well, things kind of leave the carnival theme kind of goes away, but then gets moved to the city when a couple characters move on. I'm not actually gonna keep that out of spoilers there, or I'm gonna keep that for the spoiler section. But a couple characters move on from that, and then it gets to where you can't take an act too far. This is something a character Pete said. You can't take the act too far. You can't believe it so much that you lose sight of what it is. You have to remember, at the end of the day, what you may think that you have, you really don't have. You have ability, but you don't, like, you don't want to con yourself or try to take a con too far, or you believe it, you get in too deep and it doesn't work out all that well. You're trying to keep all the blood in your head instead of going under. But little Sum 41 reference there for you guys. But from there, it's really, really nice how they don't establish exactly what the year is, but you figure it out through various dialogue pieces. There is at one point where Willem Dafoe's character, Clem, says, oh, that Charlie Chaplin looking, fella, invaded Poland. Well, that right there tells you, about, Hitler and that kind of stuff and that invasion and everything. It's set around the late 1930s. And then we get, we bounce around a little bit. We do move a couple years into the ahead, and we see all this great acting and just sumptuous cinematography. And I gotta say, Cate Blanchett, this is one of her best roles in a while. She was just perfect. And there's enough devious nature of various people where you're not quite sure what's going on. But I will say that this is, at times, also one of the most obvious, probably because I've seen so many movies. If you haven't seen a ton of Del Toro movies, you might not be able to figure this out. And while it has great acting and great, just style to it, film noir style, I mean, it is fucking tremendous. The shadows, the cinematography, just everything about it, the fashions, and the acting is fucking phenomenal. Bradley Cooper is perfect in this. Perfect as somebody that may have his own motivations, and there are various others that have their own motivations, but it's very obvious from early on who the villain actually is, and you see things play out where it all comes back to something from near the beginning that ties into the very end. So it's fucking great, fucking phenomenal. I would argue that this is probably about his best since Pan's Labyrinth, in my personal opinion. That was a great period piece as well. That had more horror things. You don't get anything creature putting their hands in their eyes and doing that, and fairies getting eaten. At least not in the cut that I saw. Maybe you will see it in the director's cut. Nightmare Alley Fairy Eaten Edition. Man, that would be a bit weird to call it that. But watching Del Toro just masterfully craft this is one of my favorite movies of the year easily. I mean, I'm going to be doing like my list here in a little bit, like, by the time you watch this, but this will be high on the list and I will be talking about it again. But this is fucking perfect. Now, it is, again, a slow burn movie. That's basically what it is. And it's not going to be for everybody. I would argue this is not something that somebody needs to watch in theaters if you're not willing to sit down, because it's about 2.5 hours. It's pretty goddamn long, but it's really, really good. I enjoyed the movie a lot. The carnival setting's great. Everybody plays their roles perfectly, and everybody, evens out. It establishes enough characters. You get the motivations, the relationships, and that kind of stuff. It's just perfectly done. It could not have been shorter. Even though you could argue, oh, they could have cut this. No, everything fits perfectly. It's about as close to a perfect Del Toro movie as you're going to get. So I am going to get into spoilers, though, but I will recommend, absolutely go see it. It is well worth it, but be prepared to sit down for a bit. Anyway, spoilers. Okay, so here's basically this will not take very long. Bradley Cooper's character Stanton, in the beginning, has set fire to some place. You think that maybe, it's something where it's like he's trying to hide his identity. Turns out that's actually kind of the case. He moves on to the carnival, ends up getting in with Toni Collette's character, and really takes after Molly, Rooney Mara's character, who, again, god damn, Rooney Mara is beautiful. And Ron Perlman, his character Bruno, is kind of like charged with taking care of her and making sure she's all right. He wants to make sure that anybody that's with her treats her right. Stanton is a dick. Bradley Cooper's a fucking dick in this. I'm just gonna say it right now. He's a fucking. It's obvious he's sleazy. He's slimy. You know from the very beginning that he is goddamn slimy and sleazy. Though you don't know exactly what happens, and you find out a little bit later. He gets, with gets with Molly, and even though he, sees some stuff from Clem and everything, and sees this weird freaky guy that bites the heads off of chickens for live entertainment and whatever, and is fed as far as booze and food and stuff like that or whatever, but he's obvious drunk. That ties in a little bit later. What happens is Stanton comes up with this idea to take his act with Molly on the road. They eventually do that. They take off and they decide to go. A couple years later, they go to the big city. And they take this mind reading act thing and everything because he learns it from Pete. He ends up poisoning Pete, even though they try to imply he didn't mean to do it because there's this one thing that's like the sugar cane type thing, and there's this other alcohol that they use for pickling things like kids and deformed kids and pigs in jars. I don't know why Willem Dafoe keeps that, except it actually totally makes sense that Willem Dafoe would keep that. And this guy Pete dies. And Zero's broken up and stuff like that. And they don't know for a while that Stanton was the one that did. He goes off with Molly. They have this mind reading act thing. It goes well. They run into a character, Dr. Lilith Ritter. And that was Cate Blanchett. And she's very obviously somebody that can match him wit for wit for wit. Now, do you think she's conning him? He's conning her? What is it? It turns out there's some secrets about Stanton's past, like how his dad couldn't keep his mother happy, and his mother ran off with a guy guy named Humphreys, and there's some other stuff that's told here. And Cate Blanchett also has her own stuff where she's like, hey, we need, let's take this act on the road. I want to help you out. You can cut me in on this. Or Stan says he'll cut her in and take care of her. Because he's a sleazeball, obviously he ends up, kind of getting with her for a bit. Even though he's got Rooney fucking Mara, like, why would you want to abandon somebody that looks as good as Rooney fucking Mara? I don't get it. It becomes obvious that Molly left the carnival life behind, and even though she appreciates what Stanton has done, it's obvious that Stanton is not a good guy. They get to this subplot this main plot that actually carries him on for the rest of the movie, where he helps this one guy and his wife see their son that went off to the war and never came back. And then something happens a little bit later I'll talk about. Then he gets with this doctor that gives him a polygraph test, and he gets really, really in on this thing and decides to have Molly impersonate the wife, seeing her and everything, and then she would take off, and that would be the final thing that they would do. Well, all the while, Cate Blanchett's been playing him and has recorded all his stuff, and it had this like tape recording thing or like whatever they recorded on back in the the late 30s, early 40s. And it turns out that she's been conning him and everything. And Stanton's character doesn't drink because, alcoholism ran in the family. And also he didn't want to drink. He didn't want to give in to his demons. And that was the one vice that bit him in the ass. And things go basically south with, this whole thing of trying to make the guy see his wife. And he got all this money out of him and everything. It turns out to be a con. He kills him. Runs over the guys as a security guard, and then things go really, really goddamn south, where he tries to get the money from Dr. Ritter. It turns out that she's kept the money and has just given him some stuff and has recorded all this, but hasn't recorded everything that was said. Basically a way to con him, so the con got conned. He got in too deep. He believed his own goddamn hype, and that was pretty much it. And then he ends up basically without money. Molly went off wherever the fuck she went off, and he ends up back at another carnival as the guy, as the geek that bit the head off of chickens. That's pretty much it. He beat the guy up in the beginning, and it tied back to where all that stuff that he did, he ended up in the exact same position. And there's a nice, little thing there with Willem Dafoe's character talking about how you find a geek and everything. You find them on there, you find them at the worst part, and you work on them and work on them and work on them until they're desperate enough to take the job. And that's pretty much it right there. Bradley Cooper's character ends up with absolutely nothing by the end, and given how much of a shitbag he was, that whole house fire in the beginning, he ended up he ended up letting his dad freeze to death and burn the goddamn house down because he hated his father. He's a real shitbag. It was really fucking good. It gets an A+. It gets an absolute A+. This is A-grade material. Fucking fantastic. One of the best Del Toro movies in quite a while. So yeah, that's really all I gotta say right there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments if you've seen the movie. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retlin. I'll see you soon.